Welcome, Alvaro. What did you bring?
Hello, Valerie. I brought a molcajete. A molcajete this is my grandmother's molcajete, which is a small device usually made out of lava rock or stone that my grandmother used to grind up spices before she cooked.
Ooh, okay. We'll hear more about this molcajete soon. Thank you, Alvaro. And Elizabeth, what about you? What did you bring?
I brought a typewriter.
That's like an old school typewriter. Wow. Okay, this is gonna be quite interesting. The two of you went some throwback. I'm so excited. Well, first of all, welcome to this podcast, Not Quite Strangers, everyone. My name is Valerie Hope, and I am your host. This is an opportunity to witness a conversation between two people who are not quite strangers. And the idea is that we build connection, hopefully inspire curiosity, and in some way, shape, or form, challenge the status quo. Now, if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, please do so by going to notquitestrangers.com. And that way we know that you will not miss a single episode because it will be sent straight into your inbox. If you prefer to go to YouTube or some other platform for your podcasting, definitely look up Not Quite Strangers, or on YouTube, my Connect to Joy channel, and you can get notified anytime we post a new episode. But today, before we get introduced to the molcajete and the typewriter, I got to tell you about these two strangers. They're not strangers to me. Actually, I've known Alvaro now for the last, handful of years, maybe 3, 4, 10, longer?
7, I'm guessing 7, 8?
7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
That seems inordinately long.
We've known each other that long, but we didn't really start connecting until probably 3, 4 years ago. Yeah.
I start counting from 3, 4 years ago. No, because you were close friends with my brother and sister-in-law, and so we kind of knew each other tangentially. Exactly. And you have also been a guest in my previous podcast, Time to Come Alive. Alvaro, you're based in Barcelona, Spain right now. You and your family live there. Yes. And one of the reasons that I thought would be so wonderful to have you here, similar to what we did when we talked about in the last podcast, is you're a serial entrepreneur and storyteller. You have some of the most interesting and outstanding ideas about business, and you've been doing it for many, many years. And as I was thinking, Alvaro, who could I connect to Alvaro that would have a great conversation? And I thought, oh my goodness, Elizabeth Johnston. And Elizabeth, you and I met through a workshop, I think just a year ago. Right?
Yeah, I think it's just a year ago.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It was like a webinar a year ago, and then you reached out to me and we linked in, and you were also a guest on Time to Come Alive. So it feels like so much longer.
It does. Kind of like the opposite.
Yeah. It's like pandemic year. But pandemic year feels long.
It's true.
Does it ever?
And Elizabeth, for you, also in our conversations, you are all about the hustle, but in the good way. So always looking for a new way to connect to clients, to find another way to do what you do best and bring out the best in other people. I actually really thought it was intriguing to hear your love for entrepreneurship, but also storytelling is a big part of it. And in my conversation with Alvaro several months ago, he shared also a passion for storytelling. And I'm like, this is going to be a good matchup. And Elizabeth, you're in Montreal or outside of Montreal, Canada. So I'm like, perfect condition to meet a stranger. Yeah. Welcome to this podcast, my peeps.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me on again. I passed the test the first time around, I guess. So I didn't mess it up too badly, did I?
Well, let's not talk about the past.
Onward. Fair enough.
No, of course not. Neither of you. But no, I am curious, before we get into this object that you brought, these throwback objects, why did you say yes a second time, especially for a social experiment like this?
Can I go?
Go ahead.
I do apologize. I'm a Southern man. Elizabeth, please go first.
Thank you. So I really enjoyed our conversations that we had, because we had like a recording one, and then you have one before we actually record, and so I got a lot of time to chat with you, and I found that there was a lot of synergy between us. And even though this is an experiment and I didn't really know what the heck you were going to be doing, I just thought, I like what you stand for and I trust you, so let's do it.
All right. Love that spirit. I appreciate it. And I do not take the trust for granted. Thank you, Elizabeth.
So when you
all right, Southern gentlemen. Let's hear from our
So,
Southern gentleman over here.
Southern gentleman. Oh, all right, ladies. So this morning, this is what happened to me. I got a message from someone through LinkedIn from Singapore, a guy by the name of Graham. Whom I had no idea who he was. And he contacted me and says, hey, let's talk. I have a podcast company out here. And without hesitation, I said, great, let's do it. I don't know this guy from Adam. I don't know who he is. I don't know anything about him. But I realized that when people come and ask you to be a part of something, very rarely should you deny them, because you just never know where that will end up. I'll tell you quickly, the conversation started and we were joking around. He's English, living in Singapore, and he wants me to kind of become his European right-hand man when it comes to organizing his podcast that he is going to create in Singapore for businesses. So I do this, and I wanted to do this just because you asked me to. It says, hey, I want to introduce you to somebody that I think that you guys would have a great opportunity or great conversation. And I would say, why not? I love doing this because you just never know who you're going to meet and how they're going to have an impact on your life. So I take up any opportunity to meet somebody new because it's just so fun and exciting for me. I'm not shy, so I don't have any problems there. So that's why I did it. You just never know what's going to happen.
You never know. Absolutely. And I have to say, so for those of you who are viewing this, we meet about 30 minutes before we actually go live, just to make sure that the tech is working. And if there are any bugs to work out, that we have some time to do so. But we don't have any meaningful conversation during that time. It's just kind of the logistics piece. But what I found so interesting is observing how comfortable the two of you were with each other. Like, just as if, I don't know, that's a feeling that I got. What was it like for you, those first 30 minutes?
I was a little trepidatious because I've never met Alvaro before, and but I quickly got comfortable because I was open to the experience.
No problems. I was looking forward to it. I was like, Elizabeth, yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Let's go. Yeah, it was quite amusing. We laughed quite a bit. Actually, I do recall a big part of our conversation towards the end was, whether somebody needed to go. And if you should go whenever you could go. And I was like, this is like the height of comfort and friendship.
How quickly we got from, hey, Elizabeth, pleasure to meet you, to there, right?
Yeah. Like, you have to go now. Like, go. Like, wow. So I know how to pick them. It's great. It's awesome.
That's funny.
So now moving into the objects that you each brought to represent, my request is always to have my guests bring something so that we can kind of get into the heart of who you are and something that's important to you. Alvaro, tell us about this molcajete that you brought from your grandmother, and what's the meaning of it behind? What's the meaning for you of this item?
So when my grandmother passed, as all families do, they end up having the conversation about what do you want that we can give you, or that you want as a heritage idea. And I was like, you know what? I want this. I want my grandmother's molcajete. And this, my grandmother used it so much that her fingers made impressions in the stone that she used to crush the spices. My grandmother, Valeria, was an amazing cook, but it wasn't so much about the food, it was the process, right? And it was a process of my grandmother making the food and me being in Fremont, Texas, and her crushing these spices that she was going to make this calabaza con pollo, this squash with chicken. And the conversations that we would have, and she would talk about this and that, and I think that this is consistent with most Latin families, that you end up having conversations with your elders and the information that you get out of it, and the stories that they tell you. And I have so many great memories of my grandmother, that this has become what I wanted to follow me. And I brought it with me to Spain, so it's here with me in Spain.
That's
The airport
great.
looked at me a little bit funny when they saw this, but whatever.
So for those of you who didn't understand, you obviously see the item likely, but for those of you who are not seeing this and listening, it's basically a mortar and pestle made out of a stone.
Yes.
I actually, when I went to Cancun years ago, I also have one. Not, my grandmother was not in Cancun. This is much more recent. She'd already passed by then. But anyhow, I ended up purchasing one. So first of all, I love the idea of having items from different parts of the world in my kitchen. So I do love cooking and I love spices. So I have a molcajete also similar to that. It's a little larger. And I literally had to pull it on the carry-on. And I did get some strange looks. Like, this is your thing? Like, you couldn't just like buy a hat or a scarf. You bought like a big lava stone mortar and pestle.
Yeah.
That's how I roll.
They're amazing. They're amazing. The funny thing, you mentioned that they're lava, is that they do have dimples and impressions in it. So it isn't smooth. So sometimes you'll look at it and you're like, oh, there's some garlic from a couple of months ago. And it just adds to the flavor.
Well, we'll talk about kitchen hygiene in our next episode, but thanks for sharing that. We'll come back to your grandmother's molcajete. But Elizabeth, you brought our old school typewriter. So tell us about that.
Yeah, before I jump into that though, I wanted to say something about the mortar and pestle, because when they make is it like soy sauce or something? I forget what it is, but like they put it in vats. And it sits there for months, and that develops there, and that's what makes the soy sauce or the miso sauce, I can't remember, but that's what makes it so great. So I'm quite sure that all the bits and pieces from all of your grandmother's previous meals, added to the deliciousness of the meal.
Fermented garlic. So that's what it is.
There you go. Yeah.
I don't think you could sell that kombucha. Hey, fermented garlic kombucha.
Ooh.
Next.
So yeah, my typewriter. Well, I learned how to type in high school. That was one of my classes in high school. And of course, we were all being trained to be good like secretaries and that sort of thing. But then I went to university, and I brought my typewriter with me, and that's how I did my papers initially. And it was just when I think it was the second year that I started university, then we started getting computers, but it was still the computer where it was a green screen with a lighter green characters, and you had to actually put in like little bits of code before you did something. And so that was ancient. But even after I got a computer and got all savvy with that, I still like to start by hand, but then go to the typewriter. I found that I could organize my thoughts better, and I was more focused when I would use a typewriter. So, but it's connected to my love of story, and also in university, one of my favorite professors, who was a poet and humanities teacher, he didn't use a typewriter, but for me, it connects to literature and poetry and being inspired and really taking your time to create the work that you do, including a story or a business.
I think that's an interesting process. Excuse me, Valerie.
Sure.
Because I'm thinking about what you're saying there, and I think at the same cusp where it was no longer a typewriter and started using that little green dot. And now you can formulate an idea, and then all of a sudden you didn't realize you had that idea until you're 3 or 4 paragraphs in. Now it's copy, paste, insert. But with a typewriter, you can't do that. So it has to be thought through. I forgot about that memory, that it has to be put down. A lot of times it was on paper, And then you'd do that on paper, right? You'd write it all out hand, and then you'd move your paragraphs around. Then you're like, okay,
That's
I'm
right.
ready. Boom. Haven't thought
Yep.
about that for a while.
It's been a while since I've used an actual typewriter. I remember, I think it was Miss Taylor, my 10th grade teacher, taught typing class. So I did learn like proper, finger typing skills, which was great. I think now, especially because we do spend so much time in the computer, and similar to you guys, I might be maybe a few years younger, but I like 6 months. 6 months. No, but I do remember having DOS-based documents my freshman year of college, having the floppy disk, and having to carry this floppy disk everywhere. Like I'm talking the big ones, like with the kind of really floppy. And also, this idea of word processing wasn't quite a thing until like my second semester or so of university. But the process is funny you mentioned this, because I'm in a speech writing class right now. And there's a group of us who've been getting together this week for what we call writing sprints, right? So we just gather and putting together our stories, just ideas, just putting, words on paper, just words. And one of the participants, her preference is to write it by hand, and then she moves into the computer. I've learned to just type into the computer is just easier, but then of course you still have to go through the revision process. But I'm curious for the two of you, you both alluded in your item and then also in what you shared, these stories, right? These moments in time of either conversations that you've had with others or things that you remember and processing other stories. What is it about stories that are so meaningful to you?
You can take this one, Alvaro.
Thank you. So it really wasn't until later in life did story really become interesting to me from a different perspective in my life. And I'll tell you why. In Texas, when I lived in Dallas, I think in a way that I was just accustomed to doing the everyday thing. And then I had an opportunity to move to Barcelona. And when I got here, I started realizing that the history here is amazing. And I'm a pretty, I love history. But then all of a sudden, I am walking the same streets that Romans walked. I am walking the same streets where civil war has taken place. I am walking the same streets where there were the Iberian Indians that were walking, no, maybe not the same streets, but the same areas. And it really just, it sparked something in me that I started thinking back of all the other stories that have happened in my life. And then I started a tour company, and those stories, now I started doing research on it. And then I started putting it all together. And since then, my ventures have surrounded this idea of story. And so it's always been there, but I've never really dived as far as I have here recently into understanding story and what it does for generations, what it does for society, what can it do for culture. And so now I'm all in. So I'm all about the story now, and I can't get enough of it. From the podcast that I consume to the stories I search for, the movies that I look for. It's all about the story. So it's kind of a new thing to me, actually.
What kind of story? So it sounds like historical perspective is important to you, but are those the ones that you're most attracted to, or are you just in general?
Yeah, probably. I in university, there was a professor by the name of Yolanda Romero that she was one of the first Mexican American professors to teach a class specifically on Mexican American history, which at the time, this is the early 90s, really was not a thing. And she told me part of our assignment was to go and record a family member or a friend of Latin descent and get the story on tape. And I did that. And I didn't really think about it when I did it. I did it as an exercise and I enjoyed it. I still remember the conversation. And it's always been kind of tucked in the back of my head. So I think that's where it started. And as a Tejano or a Mexican American, my history is very interesting, even now that I am in the country where my name originated.
Mm.
So it's a combination of that historical context that has really pulled me back in and realized that I have a lot to say. And in addition to me saying it, I think that other people's stories are also important and I'm fascinated with. So that's the direction I've gone.
That is fascinating. And then that sounds like also the family context becomes now part of all the stories and the history that you're studying or that you're paying attention to, right? You now can draw this line even more clearly from your heritage. Elizabeth, I noticed you nodding. What are you hearing, or what's intriguing about what he shared?
So many things. So I went to Europe. I flew to Europe really on a whim. I was in my early 20s, and I heard about Europe. You read about it, you hear, you grow up and you hear stories about Paris and London, and when I landed in Paris and I'm walking around there and I just got chills. I felt like I was in an environment of iron, whereas it's tinfoil in Canada. Like there's no history really in Canada. That's what I felt back then. And like all the stories, you're walking the streets where those stories took place. And so I felt it was so powerful. And I kind of lamented the fact that we don't have that here in Canada. And I would even venture to say in North America, but my experience just, being a Canadian. But then I, went to university. It was actually after that I went to university and started studying a lot of different literature. And I realized that one of the authors that really affected me was Rudy Weeb. And he wrote The Temptation of Big Bear. So, about Canadian and Indigenous history, but in a fictional form. And I got angry because we have so much history and story that we're not taught in our high school. And then, fast forward to me doing a lot of book reviews. I was a journalist and book reviewer. And one of the books I reviewed was Montreal in the Literary Landscape, and by Elaine Kaelman-Naves and Brian Demchinsky. And that too, like I lived right near the mountain in the middle of Montreal, and there's this Côte St. Catherine road behind where I used to live. And that paved street, if you lift that pavement up, underneath it is an Indigenous trail, and that they would walk, and and I just thought, oh my goodness, it's here. Like, and so the chills that I had back in Paris and traveling around Europe about like, oh my goodness, well, so steeped in history. I was steeped in history in my own country, and I didn't even know that. Like, we didn't have those stories told to us. And, so for me, stories, we're all made of stories. That's the thing that in later life, as I was teaching it a lot, I realized that that's how we understand who we are. It goes to our identity. And oftentimes we have to uncover our own identity through figuring out what those stories were that weren't told to us.
You know what's interesting? You use this analogy of having Canada as tin versus Europe iron. So I thought about tinfoil, right? And because these societies in North America are much more modern, the European influence is modern. Just the European influence is modern, right? And so, but it's like covering something with tinfoil is to give a nice shiny sheen, right? Updating, modernizing perhaps, but really the essence that you've described with the Indigenous heritage that's there, that's the iron. It's actually even, it predates iron.
Exactly.
Right? Predates iron, but to your point, in so many cultures in North America are not, at least in the US and Canada, likely. I'm not sure what Mexico would say about this, or Central America, but there's definitely opportunities for us to unearth, right, to remove the tinfoil and to see. And I guess with cultures that are so intermingled, it can be quite challenging to prioritize one over the other because they're so distinct, right? They're so distinct. I'm curious for the two of you, Well, Elizabeth, in your case, for example, you obviously have a lot of experience. You mentioned literature is a big part of your, not only your education and your background, but your passion, interest. But business is also, so I know you talked a little bit about it in my Time to Come Alive podcast, but I'd love for you, especially to give Alvaro some context. What are some things that you've done, or how have you seen those two come together, like entrepreneurship and storytelling?
Yeah, so I think that there's a big drive right now to use more story in your business, to grow your know, like, and trust factor. And I think that that's a good thing, but I also feel that there's this idea that, oh, here's a template for your origin story, just fill in your specific details, and now you're good to go, and use that in your business and get a zillion clients. But for me, I really feel like story in your business is about figuring out why you're doing what you're doing, right? So Simon Sinek says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. But there's so many entrepreneurs that don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. You just think, oh, well, I'm making some money, or I don't know, I just fell into it, or and so for me, I think that's like key. It's not just to create better relationships with clients or potential clients, and also JV partners, joint venture partners. I think story has a place in there. But I think first and foremost, it's about figuring out why you do what you do, and then also seeing all the connections to what you are doing now in your past. Because Kierkegaard said that we live life forwards, but we understand it backwards. So to really understand what you're doing in your business, you just need to turn around and look where you've come from. What are the stepping stones that led you here? And so I created this, this approach to story, which I call mission memoir. So, a lot of people want to write a book about their business, but I help them write a book about their business and why they do what they do. So it incorporates their personal story in that journey. So people get to know, like, and trust you, but also see that you can deliver on a system to help them. So it's both of those things. And I think that helps us be authentic and in integrity, with what we're doing, as opposed to just like, oh, I got to pay the bills and I got to make a living, that we get more connected to who we are when we unearth those stories and connect them to our daily life, including our business.
Yeah, 100%. What I've found interesting is there are things that I do innately, or things that I've learned to do, that by actually kind of analyzing and peeling back, kind of like you said, looking backwards, I can go, oh, that's that thing, right? Even now, we mentioned earlier that this podcast, the idea of doing this particular Not Quite Strangers podcast was actually months in the making. Back in August or so, Elizabeth, I shared with you kind of this idea. And then Alvaro, shortly after that, I shared it with you as well. But I still couldn't quite figure out what it was about this that was driving me. And I now started to realize, even after last night, I had a conversation with my sister-in-law, Eva. And when I was sharing with her, I'm like, everything is just kind of coming together with this podcast. All these guests are showing up. I'm thinking of people to connect, and like, it's quite a momentum. And she's like, but you've always been that way. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, oh, that's true. Now there's just like a platform to now do it in. But so looking backwards, I could see that, yeah, I've kind of always had this penchant for connecting people, for meeting new people, for asking questions. And the platform I use and the format is taken, the vehicle is shifted based on what I'm doing now and, what technology is available. So that's really interesting.
Elizabeth, I have a question. I was listening to you about the know, like, and trust factor. How have you learned to implement stories, historical stories, into business? Because it's happened to me. Now I'm in a place where during this pandemic, it threw us all a curveball. And I'm now in a space where I am absolutely going to incorporate history into my new business. What do you recommend to companies that want to do that and don't really know exactly how to start that process? And from what context historically should they create that story?
So what is your business?
I don't think we have time today. Seriously,
Today's business, just today's
I-
business.
today's business. No, so what has transpired recently is that I was a hobby podcaster. I guess in a way I still am a hobby podcaster, but then I shifted that hobby to profession. So now I am creating and helping other people create their own stories. But then in a strange uh, request, I was asked to be a tour guide again. And I did it because it excited me to do so. But the funny thing is that when I went into that experience, I realized that what I'm doing now as a tour guide, which is doing it with my phone, I realized that I can use that technology to bring story to a bigger crowd and a more interesting story to a bigger crowd. So I'm in the middle of figuring out how to build a business about taking story to other people. So I guess my question is, how do I create that like and trust fact, know me, like me, trust me factor into my marketing and this new venture?
Yeah. So in the market, you're a tour guide and a virtual tour guide right now,
Yes,
if I understand. Yeah.
yes.
So and so if there's anybody else in your space, I don't know if there's many people in your space, um, but the idea here is to show why somebody should hire you as their tour guide versus somebody else.
Mhm.
And that is through your personal story. So why did you decide to create that particular business? So that's the first thing that you need to ask. And when you're on tour, yes, you're learning about like the other, but you're also learning about yourself. And if you're really open to the journey, you will take back some lessons with you into your everyday life. And it sounds to me from what I've just heard, during our conversation today, that your history is really important, like the objects from, your grandmother and your personal history, but also rediscovering, in a land of where your name is from, like a new level of connection to your history. And so you as a tour guide online, even as a podcaster, in a way that's a tour guide into people's minds, just like what Valerie is doing with us now. That's an opportunity for us to learn about ourselves. And I mean, that's what great literature does. We learn about ourselves by placing ourselves in the shoes of the person who's the main character, right? And so you're the main character behind your business, but you're also wanting to create a main character experience for the people who are hiring you to do these virtual tours. So saying why you do what you do and connecting it to your Latin American history, and the importance for you of that connection and opening it up to a wider audience, I think that's a place to start.
Elizabeth,
Thank
you
you for
asked a
that.
really interesting question. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I kind of do because it's fun. You run these workshops, Elizabeth, with people who are interested in mining stories, right? So if Alvaro was in one of your workshops, what question would you ask him? And I think you already did, right? But if you were asking him a question to share today, like right now, and in a couple minutes to share, what question would you ask him that would begin the process of unearthing his why?
Yeah, so this is my big secret. And so whatever business that you have now, flip it to the opposite. So you want to create this experience for other people. When in your life did you not have that experience? Or when in your life did you realize that experience was missing?
All right, Alvaro, you got to tell us the answer now.
The funny thing about that is that I never knew it was missing. I never knew it was missing. And I guess because I am Texan and we have an interesting history, I always knew it was there. But, I confuse a lot of Europeans, especially Spaniards, Catalans, that when they see my name, it throws them for a loop because they see Alvaro and they see Garza. And then when they see me, they're like, okay, must be of Latin descent. Obviously, I am. But then when they hear my American accent, they're just, they're just like, what? They're like Yankee. And so the truth is, I don't know. I don't know when it did. I don't know when I never realized that it was missing. And that's a real interesting perspective, right? Because a lot of people like myself, Valerie included in this, because you were also of Latin descent, the that you never realized, and Valerie, that's interesting, right? Because you never, I'm sure you had these experiences when you were in Spain for the first time, and all of a sudden you realized, oh, okay, this is where my language comes from. Oh, this is where having traveled Latin America. Oh, this is why we take naps, and that's in air quotes, in the afternoon. This is why we have the architecture that we have. But it wasn't, I didn't really realize that I needed it until I got here, and it kind of fit. It made it whole. It made it like a full circle. And then I think about my own, what I'm passing on to my own kids, right? Because my son gets confused when I tell him about Taco Tuesday, and he's like, "Well, why are we eating tacos?" It's like, "Well, son, it's just because we do it. What are tacos? Where do they come from?" I was like, "Well, it's a longer conversation that we'll have later." But it kind of made it full circle for me because I didn't realize that it was missing. But then once I was here, it's like, oh, that was the missing piece.
Yeah.
And this conversation right now has got my creative juices flowing, because I'm realizing that that's a really provocative question to ask, because I didn't recognize it until later.
Yeah. But what we do in our business is fill a gap. I mean, that's like, all, business schools say, like, find the gap and, fill that with your business. Like, what are other people not doing? And it's not just a business gap. It's a gap within us, right? Like all of our businesses are an expression of who we are. And I think that's the other thing that I'm so passionate about bringing story into business, is to bring those two halves together. I think a lot of people are disembodied in their business, right? They leave behind their history, because like that's no way to like make millions of dollars. But it's you're going to be fragmented in your business, and you won't achieve the success that you want until those two sides of you are reunited.
I got to introduce you, Elizabeth. I'm like, Alvaro, you're a great podcast guest. So I'm not changing this. Matchup is excellent. But Elizabeth, I just thought of someone else I want to introduce you to. Her name is Alicia White. She is now, she's expanding herself into talking about wildlife. And yesterday she hosted a little webinar on Facebook Live to talk about her experience. And it was so interesting because that was the first time that she's been like branding strategist coach for quite a while, and now is pivoting. And what's fascinating is to hear her and what she talks about. She and her husband go to trips to Yellowstone National Park here in the US. And for the last 15 years or so, they've been doing this. And she has all these beautiful photographs of animals. But when she started talking about them and what was important to her, it was like she was a whole different person. So interesting when you say that people get disembodied. There's something around how business is supposed to somehow reflect like societal norms, right? There's a title, there's the financial aspect, there's some sort of reputation, the brand. But sometimes, or oftentimes, I would actually challenge, oftentimes we don't have the meaningful conversation about why me and why that, or why that way, right? To really have those two together. So I'm curious about your story, Elizabeth. So if you were asking that question, like what was missing for you that had you decide this was how you wanted to support, entrepreneurs or business people in crafting stories, what would you say?
Well, for me, I've struggled for quite a while to create my business independent of my teaching gig. And I used to think that it was because I didn't go to business school. I don't have a business degree. I have literature and screenwriting. And so I took a 1-year program, an entrepreneur program here in Montreal. And I thought it was going to help me learn how to be an entrepreneur and give all those missing business pieces. And we had to do a business plan. That was the first time I've ever did a business plan, and it was an excruciating process. And so I have, colleagues, and I gave that to one of my colleagues, and he said everything that was wrong with it and everything that I needed to do to fix it. And so it was great advice. So I went away and I fixed it, and I did, a couple of revisions. And then all of a sudden I saw the story that I was trying to tell. And as soon as I realized that a business plan is just a story that you are telling to entice other people to believe in your vision, it's like, oh my goodness, why didn't they say that at the beginning? And so for me, I realized that I have everything that I need to create my business. And I don't have to leave behind my creative story side to do it. So for me, that was a big aha moment. And I think that, that's one layer of it. But in terms of like why I still do what I do, because I could have done, anything, but I'm doing what I'm doing. For me, it goes back to history and identity as well. So when I actually grew up in Ontario, and I moved to Montreal, which is a French city here in Canada. And friends said, like, why are you moving there? Everybody smokes like fiends, which they do back then, not anymore, thank goodness. And you don't speak French. So how are you going to get a job? And I said, well, it'll all figure itself out. And it did. But what I think a year or so after I moved here, my grandmother came to visit, and she said, she dropped into the conversation about how my other grandmother that I never met on my father's side, that she didn't really speak to her because she didn't speak English. And I said, well, what language did she speak? And she said she spoke French. And I go, what? and it turns out that I have ancestors that go back to the 1500s in France. There was two brothers, the Robuchon brothers, who were given land by the King of France, and they came to New Brunswick, and there's towns that they created that are still there. And I've got like a history that one of the Robuchon priests there made the family history all the way back to the 1500s. And all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't just like a second generation, because my grandparents came here after the Second World War, Eastern European, and I always felt like I didn't have any history. I was walking on tinfoil all the time, that, there was no roots. And it's like, oh my goodness, I do have roots. And so for me, it just is so important that even if you don't have that, like I discovered it, and that was like a happy thing to like connect me to this land. But even if you don't have that, we all are made of stories. We all need to figure out who we are. And if we don't like the story that we've grown up with, that we need to make a new story. And we have that power as well. We can reframe things. There's so much power in the story to advance who we want to be. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. So for me, we have to embrace our stories. We have to unearth them and integrate them, because that's like half the picture.
Walking around on tinfoil streets. No more tinfoil. It is fascinating once we start to peel things back. I mean, sometimes it's not so obvious, or they're just small moments. I think, and Alvaro, you alluded to this, I don't connect to European culture, even because I speak Spanish. I'm originally from the Republic of Panama, and third generation Panamanian. But what really stands out to me about my cultural identity is the West Indian part of it. So a lot of my great grandparents came from, a lot of them, all four of them, or other generations, from the Caribbean islands. So Barbados, I think Jamaica, and Montserrat. There's a couple of places. It's been interesting to uncover that. Although I'm not a huge history buff, but I've been to Aruba and I've been to Trinidad. So I've not been to some of the islands that my ancestors are from. But when I went to Trinidad specifically about 5 years or so ago, I remember these small things, like, for example, sorrel, which in Mexican culture is called Jamaica, the hibiscus, right? So hibiscus tea we grew up in Panama drinking saril, we say it, and it's a sweetened drink. We put ginger in it, and some brown sugar. So it's a really nice iced tea, basically. But they had in Trinidad sorrel cake, and I was like, oh, they make cake out of this too. Like there's more than what just this experience that I have. And I remember like pepper sauce, they call it pepper sauce, which is hot sauce. I've always loved hot sauce, but there's this particular type of hot sauce, not the Cajun stuff that we might see here in the US, not the Tabascos, but there's with like Scotch bonnet peppers, or there's turmeric, there's different seasonings. And going there and tasting that was like, there was a moment of home. It was so fascinating to start to see some of those threads that I could start pulling, like, oh, there's some similarity here. Now my mom's all excited. She's like, we gotta go to Barbados. I'm like, all right, slow your roll, mom. We're a pandemic right now. It's just like, take it down a notch. But I think to both of your points, this idea of us connecting to who we are and who we are being an influencer or embodying, our business is embodying who we are in a meaningful way. I think that's the luxury, I'm going to call it luxury, or maybe a benefit that entrepreneurs have, because we create it from the ground up. And so I'm curious about, and Alvaro, I'll start with you. Why work so hard? Because we're creating something from the ground up. Why work so hard?
That's a really good question. It's a question that I've asked myself often because it's outside of this pandemic being very difficult on everybody, which I think motivated everybody to work that much harder. But I don't know. It's just ingrained in who I am to go and seek. And I think that it's kind of, it's something that I enjoy doing. So I can't stop it. It's like something I just can't stop. It's oh, look, a new shiny thing. I know that sounds simplistic in saying that, but it really, it's just, that's why I work so hard at doing that. It's just because I can't stop it, and it interests me, and it lights a fire underneath me, and that's why I just can't stop.
Can't stop. Can't have just one.
No, I just keep going, and that's why I work so hard at it.
Elizabeth, what about you? Why do you work so hard at this?
Well, I think it's connected to being true to who you are as well. But even people who are working for a company and they don't work for themselves, they still need to be the CEO of themselves. And I think that they need to work as hard to create a fulfilling life for themselves. And if it's outside of the workplace, they have to work that much harder to, create it outside of the workplace. And so I think that it doesn't matter whether you are working for the man or you're working for yourself, that you are going to work hard, because a lot of people who are working for other people are miserable, and they have to go through a series of contortions in their life in order to convince themselves that they're okay with working for somebody else. And so they work hard at being happy with that kind of workplace. Some people are happy, but there's a lot of people who are not, and that's why we have so many cases of burnout, so many EAP programs. It's not for nothing that these kinds of businesses actually create the conditions for people to not be well and to get burnt out. And so whether you're in corporations, you're working for yourself, you're going to be working just as hard. But as an entrepreneur, you're working for yourself and to bring your vision to fruition, which you don't have the opportunity necessarily when you're working for somebody else.
I agree with that. And I'll add to that now as a parent, it isn't just about me anymore. It's about leaving something behind that I want my kids to look back on me and say, hey, my dad did this, and this excited my dad. And I know that my father was interested in that. And I'm excited that my father, was interested in surfacing these things in his entrepreneurship and the way that he treated society and how he put his own story into that. that interests me as well, and it keeps me on a pretty straight path to do something good in
Yes.
conjunction to that. So
Yeah.
it's about perspective, and me. I just I'm inquisitive as is, and I love to experiment, and I love to fail because that means that I'm doing something right. So that that it just keeps me going. But now having kids, it's magnified, it's amplified, as the now popular word to use. That it's amplified to a level that I never understood just 5 years ago. It's
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah. The Samuel Beckett, the playwright, he said, he has a quote: "Fail, fail again, fail better." And I love that quote because you can't succeed if you don't fail. A lot of people
Absolutely.
are really, they're wanting to look for shortcuts, just to, jump from A to like success. And it doesn't happen that way. And it's actually not the most enjoyable way to go about it, because everything is easy, then you're not going to be motivated to make things better. Right? Yeah.
Either that or people wait. They don't
Yeah.
start something because they want it to look or be a certain level. And especially nowadays, I think there's what we see in social media is a finished product in many cases, right? Things can be quite, I don't want to say overproduced, but they're produced at a certain level, depending on the amount of money that people want to invest. But one thing that I've always connected to is I feel like I'm very purpose driven. And so when there's something in my heart and my soul that's urging me to just move forward, I just go and build it as I go. And I have a beautiful circle of people like the two of you that I can tap into and go, what do you think about this? Or what feedback would you have? Or what, upgrades? And so I think that's one of the ways that failing better works for me, is like I just have more conversations with people who can support me getting to something faster.
Definitely.
And we could talk forever, clearly, and there's always more and more that comes up the longer we go. But I think at this point, I like to zoom out of the conversation that we've been having, not to take anything away from what you guys have both shared today. And I hope that this continues. But so a couple questions come to mind. One is, what conversation or what part of the conversation would you want to continue, if any? Or a new conversation, perhaps, that you'd like to have that we didn't get to?
Well, for me, I can't believe that it's almost been an hour that we've been chatting, and it's just not enough. I'd love to chat more with Alvaro about your tour guide business, and just like, other stuff that you're doing, and your interest in reconnecting to history in a new way. So I think that's really fascinating, those things that you shared.
Yeah, and to your point, I am really fascinated in you bringing up the connection between business and story. I mean, you have advertisers that have been doing it for years. You have people that have said, "Oh, this is a business. This is the way it's supposed to be." But I think that we're in a new time, and I think that there has been a cultural shift with the movement of Black Lives Matter. I think with the shift um, of all the I don't want to say problems, but the things that have happened from women. This is the first year having a first female vice president, and I think that there will be more glass ceilings be broken here in the near future. But today I was watching a story about uh, Muslims in China right now, and how business is making a shift and saying we're not going to support that anymore. We are not going to support the genocide that's going on in Asia right now when it comes to separating families and possibly genocide. We don't really know. We'll wait to see what happens there. But for us North American minded people, what does business mean now? How are those stories being rewritten? And how is that going to make businesses change? Because they're going to have to change. I think that when people become aware and I think, how they say it, when people become woke, that they make their decisions. And how are those stories going to change? And I think that connection that I'd love to continue would be between the connection and business and the stories that are now going to be told for marketing purposes. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So more to come there. And
Yes,
I'd love to
indeed.
hear from the two of you, thinking about where we started, an hour and a half ago, right? With our pre-talk to now. Can you share a little bit about what your experience was when we first started to how you feel about it now, just meeting each other and having this conversation?
Well,
Well,
I
I
wish we were
think
closer. I think the technology, it helps, and it makes it possible. But next time I'm in Canada, let's go grab a beer for sure.
definitely.
No,
Yeah, and
I really enjoyed that. I'm sorry to step on you again, but it's this is the reason why I said yes, because I would have never had an opportunity to get insight into something that's very close to me right now, and I mean is immediate, if I would not have met Elizabeth. So first of all, thank you, Valerie, for making that happen.
It's my pleasure.
yeah, and I really feel like you've opened up a door that is like shining with like brilliant light that we all can go through now, that this introduction. And and I think that I started, like I said, with a little bit of trepidations, like how's this going to go? And, but very quickly was very comfortable. And now I can see that there's so many connections. And I do know this already, that when we start sharing our stories, that so many connections will unfold. And I'm very grateful for you to have asked me to participate in this.
Well, I'm grateful that both of you said yes, but I'm also curious, what was the most challenging part of this? I get that, Elizabeth, you were feeling a little trepidatious. Alvaro, you were like, why not? But what was the most challenging part of this experience?
Elizabeth, if you
If
want
there
to,
was one.
if not, I'll take
Go
it.
ahead. Go ahead.
For me, and like any conversation, I am a fantastic small talker, but I'm a fantastic small talker to get to a connection. And although I've become very efficient at small talking to get to a connection, that for me is always the most difficult part. After that, it's all easy, because once you make that connection, which I think this whole conversation has been surrounded, making that connection of my story into entrepreneurship or my story into business, that it just naturally happens. And once we found that connection, I think that we both just kind of fell into it naturally, and then it's not so hard.
Love that. I'm a terrible small talker. I can't stand it. I don't like small talk. I want meaningful talk. So
Yeah.
yes, if we meet.
Well, sometimes you got to small talk to get the meaning, because
Nope. I started right up at the top. Even at the grocery store, how's your day? Well, I didn't get a nap today, so my mood is actually not as great as it should be.
Okay, thank you. I'm on.
I'm that person. I'm like, don't come with the small talk around here.
But we had small talk in the pre thing.
You consider that small talk?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, adjusting your lights and getting a book to put my lamp on, and just that kind of stuff. I mean, that's just getting things ready, and yeah, just sort of warming us up.
Is cracking a joke small talk, Valerie?
No, not necessarily. So, this is interesting. How would you define small talk? For me, small talk is like surface, perfunctory conversation. Is that how you say perfunctory conversation?
Sure.
Right? It's just,
but it's about the weather. We talked about the weather.
Yeah, but it was in meaningful ways.
Okay.
I think it's not the topic. The way I have it is not necessarily the topic, and it's not the time frame. It's really the intention. Like, it's the intention just to get by and just like, oh, hi, how are you? How are you? What's up? Oh my gosh. It's like, let's not do this dance. So I've challenged myself. And I'll say a really quick story. I remember going to a grocery store, and I was wearing this new pair of boots that I thought were like super cute. And when I go to the checkout counter at the grocery store, so happened the person that I was, walking up to, she saw the boots and mentioned like, oh, I really like those boots. I'm like, they're super cute, right? my feet are killing me. And we start to laugh. And it completely shifted that 2-minute interaction where we're, how's your day going? Did you find everything you needed? I'm like, oh, why, people? But that was a moment in time where I'm like, we actually have the power to shift this idea of small talk. We still have a short amount of time, and it can still be something quite superficial, but the intention that we bring to it is really about getting to know how the other person is doing, and what's important to them. Yeah, weather could be that. Could be, I love the rain. I wish I'd gotten a chance to go walk in the rain last night, but it was too dark and it's probably not safe.
We're under lockdown. We have a curfew here. So we
Do you
can't go
really?
out. Yes.
What's the curfew?
I think we have to be in by 8 p.m. and we can be released back into the wild at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ours is we're done by 10.
10 is your curfew?
Yeah.
And what time does it open back up?
6.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think Texas is at a curfew. I've been loose and fancy free for the past 12 months.
A couple got a fine for taking a walk after hours here, and she put her husband on a dog lead and said, "I'm walking my dog." So that.
Hey, here somebody took their goldfish.
Because I'm assuming animals are allowed, clearly.
Yeah, you can take your dog out or whatever, because they need to go when they need to go.
like TMI, lady,
Here
TMI.
we go back to the beginning.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, too comfortable. There we go again with that.
So there were people that were renting out their dog.
Oh, yeah.
We were on total lockdown, which was 11 months ago. They were like, hey, does anyone need to take my dog out? So they would pass the dog on to the neighbors. I'm going to take your dog out. I'm going to take your dog out. I want to go for a walk.
Mental health. That's great for mental health.
Yeah.
Yes. Don't borrow somebody's dog. I'll take a plant. Plant is a living thing, technically.
Yes.
I'm gonna take a plant out for a walk.
You'll still get a ticket though. If you take your plant out for a walk, you'll get a ticket after curfew.
I don't want a ticket because of a plant. Well, look, we've strayed from the conversation a slight bit. But look, more than anything, though, I want to thank both of you, for being willing to play the mystery entrepreneur of the week game or whatever this was.
Yeah, I loved it, Valerie. So thank you very much for doing it, Elizabeth. I am more than positive that we are going. This is not our last time to.
No, definitely. Yeah. We will connect.
I hope so. And actually, not only the two of you, but any of you who are tuning in and listening or watching this episode, we will have opportunities every quarter to connect with our guests. So if you want to meet Elizabeth and Alvaro in person, there are opportunities for that coming up. But you got to subscribe, because if you don't subscribe, then you won't get an invitation. We're exclusive like that.
Yes, very important.
Yes. And more than anything, Elizabeth, thank you too for being here, for making time in your day to share your skill and passion. Do you have anything coming up or anywhere that you'd like for people to connect with you? Because I'm sure some people are like, I need to write my story.
Yes, I do actually, and I can give you the link for it. It's a 3-day event, Tell Your Stories, and it's coming up in May 12 to 14.
May 12th to 14th. So this might be produced or published later,
again.
But it sounds like you do this on a regular basis. Perfect.
Yeah.
So, well, if nothing else, people will have your website in the show notes so that they can connect with you. And Alvaro, what about you? I know you're doing your tours right now. I'm not sure what this is going to look like when we publish this, but what would you like to leave people with out of this experience and conversation, or how would you like for them to connect with you?
Honestly, I want people to share with me. I want to keep this open to where if you feel like there's something that you want to share, I'd like to incorporate it into what I'm doing right now. I'm in the process right now of building a business that's far bigger than I am. And I invite people to be a part of it as well. So be in touch with me if you have an idea that you want to talk about your story and history, and telling that story and how it combines with tours or showing your own backyard. I'm going in that direction. So be in touch with me if you have some ideas. about telling your stories and history, because I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm pretty excited about its future.
I love what you said about, even if it's in your own backyard, because Thoreau, the writer, the American writer, he's famous for saying, "I've traveled widely in Concord," which is a very small town. But, the idea is that there are amazing and wonderful things to see in your own backyard.
And that's what I want to get to.
Elizabeth, I think we're going to have a compendium of your favorite quotes because you've had like 7 of them. And I'm like, I didn't write all of them down. I'm going to have to watch the recording just to see, like, what was that thing she said about Dostoevsky? Or, no, you didn't.
Kierkegaard.
No, Kierkegaard. And yeah, you've mentioned several Thoreau. Just,
Yeah.
Just name dropping all those literary geniuses.
Yeah, my friends.
Britney Spears once said, sorry, Britney, I know you're going through something so far. Sorry, delete. Guys, thank you so much for taking time out today, sharing with one another, sharing with each of us what you're up to, your passion, and also your process. I'm excited to see what comes out of this connection. Not only that, but then anyone who's been listening and inspired by what either of you have shared, connecting with you, perhaps you've inspired some new idea or inspired someone to, do business with. Who knows? That's the whole idea. For those of you who are not subscribed, again, I just ask you go to notquitestrangers.com to make sure that you do not miss this episode or any future episodes, getting those straight into your inbox or on your favorite podcasting platform. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.